wanna play?
Look at me, Damien. It's all for you.
I am the devil, and I am here to do the devil's work.
They're coming to get you, Barbara.
They're here.
Welcome, everyone, to the very first episode of the Gruesome Task podcast. I am one of your co-hosts, Deonte, and I'm here with the ever so lovely
Jose. Nice to be here. I'm excited for this first episode of the podcast. We've been working for so long towards this. We are excited. Let's go.
Yes, we have. Very excited, and we have about an hour content for you guys. A lot of good stuff, a lot of interesting facts, and we hope that you do like it. So first, I guess we should go ahead and introduce what we're going to be talking about. And if you don't follow us on Instagram, which you should, at Gruesome Task Podcast. Did I get that correct?
I believe so. I think on Instagram it's the Gruesome Task Podcast, or something like that.
Yes, we will.
It should pop up.
We will have it there, and we will make sure to have that in the notes of this podcast as well in the description. And if you hadn't seen it there, which we announce every Wednesday, what movie we are going to be talking about today is Night of the Living Dead. Not the 1990 version. This is the OG 1968 OG original version of the film. Of course, made by George A. Romero. And we got some information on that if you want to go ahead and get into it, Jose.
Yes, Night of the Living Dead, released in October 1st of 1968. It was directed by George A. Romero, as previously stated. He also did the cinematography and the editing of the movie. The writing credits go to both him and John A. Russo. The runtime of the movie is about 96 minutes. The production company was Image 10, produced by Carl Hardman and Russell Streiner. We also have the budget for that movie of $114,000, and the box office actually came in at $30 million. So that profit was spectacular. The cast of the movie, we have Ben, who is Dwayne Jones, Barbara, played by Judith O'Dea, Harry Cooper by Carl Hardman, Helen Cooper by Marilyn Eastman, Tom is Keith Wayne, and Judy is Judith Ridley.
Yes, and a fun fact for all those that do not know, the original title of the film is Night of the Flesh Eaters, which Flesh Eaters will be brought back up as we talk about the film a little bit. But interesting title. It doesn't roll off the tongue like Night of the Living Dead.
No, it doesn't. It's I don't think it would have been as much of a success if they stuck with that original title.
Yeah. And then of course, the original kind of story with that, there was already something that had a similar title. And so they did not use that, and they switched it kind of last minute to Night of the Living Dead. And unfortunately, they didn't have copyright for it, and which led to it just being public domain, multiple releases of it on different media formats and merchandise and everything else. So.
Yeah, exactly. Let's see. So I guess we really decided to choose this movie because over the next few weeks, we're going to discuss a lot of Black horror and the impacts that it's had in our lives, especially with what's going on in today's world and the Black Lives Matter movement. We are very passionate about this movement, and we support it fully 100%. And we really want to discuss the horror, because Black horror is very rare and very scarce, and we don't have too much of it. We need more, and my Deonte definitely agrees with that.
100%. Yeah, we really don't. When we were going through the different films to pick for this podcast, there wasn't a lot to choose from, to be 100% honest. And it just doesn't seem right. There definitely needs to be more. Some of the films we'll talk about later on in future episodes will lead to some more modern ones that have been done. But when you think about from 1968 to now 52 years later, there's just, it's ridiculous. There's not enough African American people that are portrayed as leads in horror films, or horror films wrapped around focused on Black culture. So
exactly.
right. And we do, of course, want all of you. You know where we stand. We hope that you're out there doing your due diligence as well, whether that's sharing the stories that are going around, whether it's donating, peaceful protesting, anything like that. Just keep it going. It's been going on for quite some time now, multiple weeks. And this isn't something that should just be going on for multiple weeks. It's something that should be going on for months, for years, until things change the way that they should have changed 80 years ago. So
yeah, exactly. We want change. We want a revolution. We don't want to go back to normal. We want Black people to be at an equal level, if not more. And the fact that they're so scarce in horror is one example. It's ridiculous to me.
Yep. So hopefully through this podcast and over these next few weeks, we're able to bring some light to these films. And if you haven't seen them, please go enjoy them. We're going to talk about where you can watch them, where you can buy them, and everything, so that way more eyes get to them that haven't been already on them. And so we'll kind of segue right into that. Night of the Living Dead. Where can you watch it? Where can you buy it? Right now, if you want to stream it for free, there's a streaming service called Tubi. You can stream it for free through there. If you have a subscription through like HBO Max, Stars, or Shudder, they have it on there as well. Otherwise, you can buy it on digital formats. I know, of course, Vudu, Amazon Prime. It's on YouTube to rent for, I believe, $2.99. And for all of our physical media people, that's what we support here. Physical media. Buy physical copies, please. You can buy the standard Blu-ray. It's a 50th anniversary edition. It's on Amazon right now. It's $9 shipped to you. It's Blu-ray and digital, so you get both copies. However, the premium packaging version is put out through Criterion. Everyone should know Criterion by now. $28. You get a 4K restoration of the film. You also get extra audio commentaries from George A. Romero. And I believe, I'm trying to think, I know it has someone else that's on there. I apologize for not having that name off the top of my head. I
know Dwayne Jones, who plays Ben, has some commentary on it, and I believe Guillermo del Toro does something with it as well.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. Thank you. And then the last thing, there is a lot of interviews on there as well. So I would say that's the version to go for. But of course, if you just want the movie, you got a $9 version for you as well. So what do you want to hop into next, my man?
The soundtrack. Let's discuss that soundtrack.
Okay, perfect. So the soundtrack released in 1982 on vinyl for the first time. That was put out through a record label called Veris Sarabade. I apologize. I'm sure I butchered that, but they're owned by Concord Music, essentially. And if you want an OG press of that vinyl, you're looking at dropping a clean $85 to $90. It is not cheap. And it went a long time, went about 36 years before it got repressed. That repress was put out in 2018, put out same exact label. It was limited, so they are sold out, so you can't buy it directly through them. However, copies are cheaper. You can pick those up for about $40 to $50 shipped to you. And those were taken through Discogs. So a good thing for it. And oddly enough, never was put out on tape, never put out on CD, which is completely weird to me.
All right, you ready to get into this movie?
Let's do it, man. Actually, let's... I had a little bit of information. Did you have anything that you wanted to touch on, like George at all?
Other than he's the guy behind all the Dead movies, so like Land of the Dead, Dawn of the Dead. He's done all those based off of what he did with Night of the Living Dead. So that's pretty much all I have.
Cool. I got 2 fun facts about our boy George. Most of us as video game nerds would probably know. He was, of course, featured back in 2010, or I guess 2011 was when the DLC came out for Call of Duty Black Ops. He had an entire zombie mode map that was based off of like him. And it was called Call of the Dead. So that's a fun fact there. And the other one, which...
Oh, I didn't know that.
Really? You didn't know that?
No, I didn't.
Yeah, there's actually an Easter egg where you do all these crazy things. You know how like the Easter eggs are for the zombie modes, and you kill George, and you get a gun that I think was called the Wonder Waffle, and it was supposed to be like this like crazy gun.
I didn't know that at all. I'm gonna have to go play some Call of Duty now.
Me, you, and Mauricio, let's do it, man. Yeah, it's essentially he kind of walks around like a ghoul. He walks around, and I think he had like this lantern that was kind of like it gave off like electricity. It's been so long; it's been almost a decade since I played it. But he walks around very slow, and basically you have to go and you kill the zombies, and you do all these Easter egg things while he's kind of chasing you in a way. And if you shoot him, he'll like get mad, and like that's when he runs after you, and so you kind of have to avoid him. But yeah, it's really, really cool and interesting. I was surprised they did that. The other like weird George Romero thing that I found is he actually was the director of an O.J. Simpson documentary.
Really? Which one?
It was called The Juice on the Loose, and it was back in 1974, which is really weird because, at least from my knowledge, that's the only sports thing he's ever done.
Really? And it was all completely sports related, right?
Yeah, it's pretty much just talking about O.J. Simpson's rise. Like, this is before, Bronco O.J. Simpson came out.
Yeah.
Which apparently...
Dang, that's crazy. I didn't know that. That's very interesting.
And like, apparently when the whole, like, O.J., like, glove Bronco situation came out, they like re-aired that documentary, but I think they changed some things.
They changed it.
I feel like they like there was extra additions or edits. I have to fact check it, but I know that for a fact it was like re-aired during that whole process.
Yeah,
but
that's such a weird time to replay that movie, though.
Exactly. Yeah, it was one of those like straight to like television documentaries because that kind of stuff wasn't in theaters,
Yeah. Dang, that's very interesting. I mean, I have other stuff, but it really pertains towards the movie that, like Night of the Living Dead, not Romero himself.
Gotcha. Did you have any kind of like interesting things or that you wanted to talk about the actors at all before we get into the movie?
Yeah. Let's see here. So the creators of this movie actually never copyrighted the film. So Romero remade it himself, feeling the need to do it his way, do it a correct way, and this was really to prevent anybody else from tarnishing what he believes was the right way. And obviously this movie holds up as a cult classic, and the way it was made pertains to what's going on today. So I think that was pretty interesting as far as him, making this movie his own and not letting anybody else. Because who knows, if somebody else would have made this movie, we probably wouldn't have Ben as a black man, And another little fun fact about that is that Romero came out and said that the reason Ben was black is because he chose who he thought was the best actor. And a lot of people had called him out on that, saying that no, there's no way that's possible. You chose a black man because he's a black man. So I thought that was pretty interesting as well. Another little thing here I have is the original idea for this movie was an alien comedy. It wasn't supposed to be about zombies or these ghouls that they call into the film. John A. Russo, not Romero, was actually working on this film, and he wanted to introduce the idea about teenage aliens coming to Earth and and eating people. It was a very interesting idea, but because of the budget being so small at $114,000, they had to rewrite, and Romero took off with the idea of the flesh eating part, and that's why we get the ghouls that we have in this movie.
That's crazy. Matt, that more than likely would not have been a cult classic.
No, teenage aliens coming down and eating everybody and as a comedy as well. That wouldn't have been very successful.
What are you talking about, man? I'd get a Criterion release today.
Night of the Flesh Eaters, but it's aliens.
That's hard. I watched that.
All right.
I had a couple interesting things as I was looking up, not with all the actors, but it's a little, or at least I find it weird that for such a cult classic movie and a movie that so many people love, is that really none of the actors that were in the movie went on to do much else. This is kind of their big swan song. Like Dwayne Jones, who played Ben, he was pretty much in like a handful of other films, like just a couple.
Yeah, he was actually the lead of Ganja and Hess. Did you know that?
Yes, I had that written down in my notes. Yeah, that one. And then there's another movie called Beat Street, which I'm not familiar with that film.
Yeah. It was a bunch of other vampire and other like horror stuff, but it was all taken as a joke and nobody took it seriously.
Really?
Yeah, all those other vampire movies that he made, they got horrible reviews and nobody took them seriously.
That's like, and then for Barbara, Judith O'Day, she, like, after Night of the Living Dead, I was looking, she wasn't in anything for 10 years, and she was in a film. And then she took a 25-year hiatus, and then she came back, and since 93, it's like every couple years she's in some, like, really, like, terrible, low-budget, like, independent horror film.
It was really just the name that everybody was after instead of...
Pretty much.
Her.
And a lot of times, in all honesty, you see that. Like, you look at someone that had like a big role in this film, and then you find, like, I don't know, it'll be like Abraham Lincoln versus the Nickel Zombies or something, right? And
yeah,
and you look and it's like all these people, and it's like David Arquette. Like,
yeah, I saw that. Like all the Sharknado movies and stuff is a bunch of like old horror actors, and they're just irrelevant now.
Yep, it's kind of sad, but I guess in a way it works because most people will sit there and say, "Oh, I haven't seen that person since they were in like Children of the Corn. Like, I'm gonna go watch this."
Yeah,
and then they go watch it, and
yeah,
they're like,
exactly.
"Oh no, this movie's bad." But what other one did I have? I think the coolest thing is the main like OG ghoul that's in there, the cemetery ghoul that you see. His name's Bill Heinzman. He actually has appeared in like multiple other Romero films. Like he was in There's Always Vanilla, Season of the Witch, The Crazies, and like multiple others.
Really?
And in every movie he plays like just some weird small part. Like, while technically he's not a small part, he doesn't have like a real name in this movie. He's just the ghoul. And in I think it's in There's Always Vanilla, he plays like a drunk guy at a bar, and it's just like for a couple scenes or something. So but I guess Romero liked him enough that he continued to bring him on because he's in like 6 of his films.
Yeah, you find that a lot in actually horror, like with the Edgar Wright films, keeping the same actors and stuff.
Gotcha. And then I think the only other kind of interesting note I have for actors was for Tom, who was played by Keith Wayne. The only movie he was ever in was Night of the Living Dead. And then he went on to do to be a singer. And then after singing, he became a chiropractor. And then he wrote books on his practice. And then in 95, he killed himself.
Wow.
So
yeah. I was not expecting that ending right there.
Yeah, but it's just like so weird because at least like I really like Tom's character in the movie, which I know we'll get into. But it's like, to me, he did very well. I would have assumed that more roles would have been in his future, but he totally went left field. Like, I never would have thought chiropractor.
It makes you wonder, like, if these actors were blacklisted because of the movie, you know, being so controversial.
That is a possibility. Yeah, I didn't even think of that. That could be true. And then I wonder as well, because I feel like nowadays with the way people kind of romanticize these celebrities, and a lot of times when you have a big movie, those actors will immediately be put in everything the next summer. And a lot of times when you look at these older films, it wasn't like that. Like these actors were in like 1 or 2 movies, and then that's kind of it. Like they're not in much else, and then they go do a day job. So it's just the way 50 years passed. Totally different world.
Extremely different world.
So that's all I have for that. If you want to go ahead and jump into the movie, we can go ahead.
All right. Well, the movie starts off with Barbara and Johnny pulling up in their Cadillac, going to visit their father's grave. This right here is where we get a glimpse of Barbara, who we believe might be the main protagonist, and Johnny is just a side character. And you can see in the background this ghoul walking around, and you don't really suspect much other than it's just some guy walking in the background until Johnny starts making fun of Barbara for, taking things seriously. She starts praying, and he makes fun of her, and it really makes you wish bad upon Johnny, which kind of foreshadows, his death.
Definitely, yeah. And the music in the beginning when they're pulling up in that Pontiac, it sets the tone for the film. It's very eerie, very creepy. You get all the different shots. There's like wide angles of just the tombstones in the background as the car drives by. I will say though, kind of different from a lot of other horror films, I didn't expect for the ghoul to attack them so early on in the film. It definitely gets things kind of started quick. I expected originally for that to kind of be like, okay, he's going to play a part later down the line where they're in the car driving home, and then, he pops up out of nowhere, right? Like a jump scare. But it let's just say things got heated very quickly.
They definitely did, man. It was I don't know, because that and the next death, they're so far in between. It really catches you off guard. You want to get to know these characters, but one of them dies so quickly, and then you go on this chase scene where the ghoul is chasing Barbara, and you're like, well, what's going on? What's happening? Why so sudden? Yeah,
and like for the chase scene, I know we talked about a little of this before filming. The ghoul is a straight up U.S. Olympic athlete, bro. I'm telling you, man. I've never in my life, and we expect a ghoul. I'm calling them ghouls because that's what my boy Romero wanted us to call them. These ghouls, they're robotic. They look mechanical. They move very slow. They drag their legs on the ground. They have these kind of slow swings and things like that. This ghoul, he ate his Wheaties, man. This dude was he was doing the 40-yard dash, and he was chasing after Barbara so quickly, so quickly,
dude. Exactly, and he was so smart too, like breaking windows with the bricks and stuff.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It doesn't make any sense, man. It's crazy. And then Johnny's death, worst death, man. The worst death in the entire film. He didn't even hit the way it's supposed to be for those who haven't seen the movie, or for those that have watched it and don't remember because they watched it so long ago. The zombie basically tackles Johnny, and it's supposed to be that Johnny smacks his head on the tombstone and knocks him out, and that's supposed to basically kill him. Well, the way that the camera angle is and the way that they fell, they didn't really fall with enough force. His head misses the tombstone, so it just looks like he gets tackled on the ground.
Yeah, and then the zombie gets back up and starts chasing Barbara. Like, he didn't, the ghoul didn't eat Johnny, so it makes you wonder, like, what the hell? Yeah,
and like, if you, in a way, like, I thought Johnny wasn't dead. Like, I'm like, he's just knocked out. Like, he's gonna show up later on, which we see when Barbara gets away. Which also is another thing. I have all types of notes. I came prepared. So they did like the easy trope that you see nowadays, which I don't know if this movie started it, where when she's running away, her shoe falls off, and instead of keep running, she like looks at the shoe like, and she like stares at it for like 10 seconds, and then she's like, oh, I gotta get up, like I'm being chased. So that happened. She gets in the vehicle, she drives off, and she hits a tree. But like when she hits the tree, that part looked really bad too, because it's not like a head-on like boom, I hit a tree. It's like she sideswiped it, but she like purposely drove into the tree.
She did. It was very purposeful. It was. Oh man, I just couldn't help but laugh at that part, man.
Oh, it was bad. It was real bad. Oh, did you know that Barbara, her character, did all her own stunts?
Did she really?
She did everything. Yeah, she did all her own stunts, every single scene. She did like an interview a while back, like, and she had stated when she did her own, she was like, "Oh, I'm a stunt woman. I did my own stunts." And they like, I guess, asked her how that was, and she said, "Well, it was a lot of running." It's like, yeah, pretty much. Well, but then I thought about it, and it's funny because after you watch the film, it's like, well, you really didn't do much running. You ran in the beginning, and then you just sat there dazed for the rest of the film. So.
Yeah, exactly. It was just that long sprint that she was trying to run after freaking Olympic runner over there.
She should have had my man should have gave her a bowl of Wheaties. She would have been good to go, bro. But then Barbara, she gets away and she runs to the house. And then what happens from there, Jose?
Well, she gets to the house and she starts looking around, and she goes upstairs and she sees this woman lying on the ground. Her face is completely gone, like a ghoul just ripped her face off. When I first saw this movie as a kid, that one shocked me because you just see skull, and oh man, that was definitely terrifying for me.
Yeah, man. And at this point, it's like an abandoned house. You don't know who lives there or anything. And then you find out the body. And then someone comes along as they're being chased by more ghouls.
Yeah, this is where we first get an introduction of Ben, who is this black man that shows up and is looking for a sanctuary, somewhere to hide. You see him fighting off these ghouls like he knows what he's doing, while Barbara's just standing there all stunned, like, what is going on? It's definitely a good introduction to the character, in my opinion.
Yes, it's interesting, and I think that they did a good job of kind of making you question, because when I watched it, I was questioning, where did he come from? Like, how did he get there? You know, is this his house? You know, all those kind of things. And you don't really find out what happens until a bit ways later. So yeah, it was definitely a good introduction to Ben.
Yeah, and one thing I noticed is that a lot of people were questioning that, why is this so focused on Barbara and Johnny at the beginning? You get their backstory as to why they went to their grave to visit their father, and drove all these miles, but you don't really get much of a backstory for Ben, who ends up being, you know, the main character of this movie, you know? So I thought that was very interesting.
Definitely. And at this point, we get the introduction to the other ghouls. Now, the difference is these ghouls are moving like normal ghouls. They're slow, they're robotic, they're mechanical. They're not as smart as the original. Now, the original's still there in the background. And we see there's a part in the movie, and I don't remember exactly which part it is, but I know that it's after kind of Ben had looked outside and saw the three of them, and the original ghoul at that point starts acting like the other ghouls, which totally didn't make sense. Like he kind of stiffens up at that point, and he drags his leg, like he's walking, and he's walking like away from the house a little bit, and he starts to move like the other ones. And it's like, that's where a little bit of the confusion came in, because it's like, why were you acting or running one way, and in the first part of the movie, and now that we're transitioning to this next part, you're acting like the rest of them. I don't know if that was just something that was, during the filming just didn't get caught. I don't know if maybe in the beginning they decided they wanted the ghouls to run and do all these things, and then midway through it they realized, oh wait, like they're not supposed to move like normal humans, they're dead. And then they changed it. I have no clue. That would have been a great question. I don't know if it's ever been answered. I know George is passed now, but I would like to know.
Yeah, I tried to look into that and I couldn't really find much, so I came up with a couple of theories of my own. I think the reason that he's running after Barbara at that beginning scenes so quickly is to kind of progress that the story to get to the farmhouse that they're in now, to get to that isolated place. You don't want to focus too much on Johnny and Barbara because they're not even the main characters of the movie. Ben is, so they want to get to Ben as quickly as possible. Another thing that I, kind of thought of was maybe that because these ghouls are undead, so their brain isn't functioning to its max capacity. There's moments where they're picking up bricks or picking up items to smash things, and other moments they're just acting like dumb old ghouls, so maybe that's those sensory between the nerves and the brains, not properly functioning.
And I never even thought of that. That's a really good point. And that does make sense. Both of those theories, if you will, make sense, because you don't want the beginning scene to drag out. You want it to be quick and get to the house, which is the main setting for the rest of the movie. So.
Yeah.
So then after that, we have at this point, after Ben comes in and Barbara had seen the dead body upstairs, she's like very distraught at this point. The way she was acting prior and more coherent and knowing what's going on is completely out the window.
Yeah, she definitely looks a little bit more shocked. And I was reading some more about that as well, is that a lot of people are suggesting that maybe she's more scared of this black man being in a home by themselves instead of the actual ghouls. So there's a lot of hidden things in this movie.
Right. And that's definitely one of those kind of things that you don't think about at first, but when you really start to kind of analyze it, it makes sense, especially thinking about the time that this was filmed. I mean, we hadn't had any black actor that was portrayed as a lead in a horror film up to this point. So
yeah, this was the first movie for that. Mm-hmm.
And so, Barbara, she's distraught, and then she noticed that blood, and it had that like loud dripping, which was really cool. Ben ends up telling her that he can go outside and he can handle both of those zombies, ghouls, and the ghouls are smart at this point. They're actually destroying the car that he came in. Like you had mentioned earlier, they take bricks and other objects. They had bricks that they were smashing the headlights of the car. So,
oh, really?
Mm-hmm. And that's when
I missed that detail.
Yeah, they're smashing the headlights of the car, which is like they still have the sense of knowing that he got here by car. So I guess the way out of here would be by car. So let's just destroy the car. And so he then comes out. He ends up hitting both of them. And the shot of it's really funny, and it's kind of like a part of the times in '68, because both little scenes where he kills both zombies, he's like hitting them, and the cameras is at like an angle up showing Ben, and all you can see is his fists like coming down like this, but you don't see the ghoul. And nowadays, if you think about it, anytime you have a scene where someone's on top of someone and they're hitting them or they're stabbing them, whatever it is, the camera kind of goes where it's like person on top, person on bottom, and it goes back and forth, back and forth. In this case, it was on Ben the entire time as he's slashing them or hitting them. And then once he's done and he gets up to go back in the house, the camera goes to like a wide angle to show that like both zombies are out. And if you look at the one on the right, he's got like blood coming down his head.
Oh, okay.
So,
yeah.
I just thought that was interesting, just the way that it was thinking about how things were filmed back in compared to now. And that's basically, if someone was maybe wondering, like, is this zombie dead? That kind of lets the viewer know, like, yeah, he beat him to a pulp in the head. They always say with zombies, ghouls, you go for the head.
Yeah, it even says so in the movie later on.
Mm-hmm. Exactly, yeah, when they're watching the TV.
Yeah.
If you want to go ahead and go next to the next part of the scene.
Yeah, this is the part where he starts boarding up the house, right?
Yeah, and your girl Barbara brings that tiny ass piece of wood over to my man while he's carrying a whole door.
She's so useless throughout this movie. It baffles me, man. She's so shook throughout the whole movie, and she doesn't ever realize until towards the end. And that this is the part where she starts like freaking out, saying, "Oh, we got to go after Johnny. We got to go back for Johnny." And so this part, I mean, it's funny to me because she deserves it, but he smacks her and she just goes unconscious. And it's definitely eye-opening because you don't see that ever in movies now, or especially not back then. Seeing
and coming from a black man hit
yeah, coming from a black man, it's she deserves it. I mean, she was acting way out there and she was just unnecessary, and he needed to get stuff done. That, to me, that portrayed him as a smart character. Like, he didn't need that no nonsense. He needed that no nonsense attitude, and she just wasn't working with them.
Yeah, and I feel like that was kind of the first thing that you learn about Ben's character, because as the film goes on, you end up seeing where, while yes, him like hitting a woman is a drastic thing, he kind of does these measures for his survival, essentially. And I know we'll get into that once we get to those scenes. I thought it was, in that scene, I thought it was funny as well. Like, I put down in notes here, like at one point when she's saying like, we got to go get Johnny, and it's like right before she actually goes and slaps him first, he's like giving her this look and like ignoring her, and he's giving her like the it ill what it ill, like your man's is dead.
Exactly.
Like, he's dead. He's gone, baby. He's not coming back. And yeah, she goes unconscious, and he turns on the radio at this point. And on the radio, they don't know what these things are. The guy on the radio actually calls them unidentified assassins, which is funny too. But it makes sense. I mean, you don't know really what they are at all. And I don't remember, and maybe you could jog my memory. Right after, like, as the radio plays, because he leaves the radio playing on, that's when he set the chair on fire and threw it out. And like, we as the viewer learn that the ghouls are afraid of fire. But but I'm wondering how he knew that. Like, I don't remember any point earlier in the movie where fire was introduced where he knew that, because it seemed like he knew exactly what to do.
I think it was just beforehand. Like I said, we don't know much about his backstory, what he was doing before he got to the farmhouse. So I think he was just trying to fight him off, and eventually just randomly found out that these things burn and they don't like fire.
Got you. Okay. Because yeah, I was wondering about that. I was like, how did he know to do that? Because it's so specific. Yeah,
it definitely was. And he knew that, but he didn't know that, you know, bashing him in the head killed him, you know? So it's that's why I say, like, he just eventually found out, because there's really no way. They've never experienced these ghouls before, so he just happened upon it.
Exactly. And this was something that also pops up multiple times in the rest of the film, and this is the first time that we see it. Ben sits down on the couch for a minute and he takes a smoke break. And for everyone knows that back then everyone smoked. It was very, very popularized. You know, smoking was a cool thing. Tons of advertisements about it. It was common. If you go watch any old black and white television shows or movies, more than likely every character is smoking. And at that point, Ben does it. And later on in the film, you'll see all other characters do it. When we get the introduction of the Cooper family, you see where Miss Cooper is smoking, and her husband, he's like stressed out, and he says, "Give me one of those." And he like takes the pack of cigarettes, and he's smoking a cigarette. And, you know, it's throughout the film. And I just found it interesting that because that was so normal then, that they made sure to incorporate that in the film.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just those small details, you know?
Exactly. Let's see, what was after that? So he sits down for the smoke break. Oh, and then this was funny. My dude Ben is hilarious. So Barbara wakes up. She like is Ben. When we tell you Ben smacked the shit out of her, Ben smacked her into Dawn of the Dead, man. That's how hard he smacked her. So
into the next film,
into the next movie. She wakes up, and then Ben's acting like everything's normal. Like he doesn't apologize. He doesn't mention anything of, you know, hey, you were knocked out, you know, this is what we got to do. He immediately just jumps back into like, we need to take these steps for action. Like his whole mindset, the entire movie is all about like making sure that he survives, essentially. And like, if someone's with him and they're going to be there with him and help him out, then he'll try and help them survive too. But it feels like a lot of it is just him.
I was reading up on the movie and a lot of theories and so forth. And one theory that stood out to me was why he wasn't so as afraid as all the other white people. And they were saying that it's because he had been living in fear his whole life because he was black, you know, and he was so used to living with that fear that this didn't faze him at all. He was ready to go into action, like he'd been preparing for this his whole life, you know?
Oh, definitely, yeah. That's true, because you think about it, like the white people, they never had any adversity or had to really deal with anything, especially during those times. And so when this happens, they're all frantic, they're all freaking out. But Ben, he took charge right away. And that was also interesting to see the entire movie is he is the leader. He sets himself as, you're going to listen to me. If you don't, well, screw it, get away from me, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, I really liked his character a lot, the way that they made him stand out as such a dominant force, you know? It stood out to me.
Yeah, and I guarantee that ruffled a lot of feathers back then too. Oh,
for sure. The black man being the lead of a movie as in general. So
I mean, imagine that. Like, I know the film did very well, but you think about it during that time. You have white people who had been racist, prejudiced black people for so long. They go see this film. They're already mad because a black man is the #1 actor. But then you have a black man that's telling all the white people what to do, and he smacked a white woman. Oh, man. Can
you imagine that rage? Oh, my goodness.
I can't. I'm surprised that went down. I mean, and Romero stood by it when directed the film. So,
he was very firm on what he believed in, and no matter what anybody said during that time.
So then we get back to the next thing I have written down here. They actually show a bunch of different shots of where the more ghouls come, and more ghouls are coming, and they have they have flesh at this point, and they're eating. Or actually, I'm totally wrong. This is my fault for writing that wrong. This was something significant that was on the radio, and I know I mentioned earlier in the podcast regarding about the flesh, how the film was originally going to be called Night of Night of the Flesh Eaters. And so at this point, he's listening to the radio, and the guy on the radio says this quote. He says, "The killers are eating the flesh of the people they kill. The killers are eating the flesh of the people they kill." And he says it like back and forth, back and forth. And the camera's like showing like Barbara on the couch, scared as hell. Like Barbara, the radio, Barbara, the radio, Barbara, the radio. And it add like the significance to it and how it mentions the flesh. You get that like a lot later on in the movie as well. You hear a ton of times where they mention the flesh. They're eating the flesh, the flesh eaters. So it's like, because they couldn't call the movie that, they're like, that's okay. We're going to continue to throw it in there.
Yeah, definitely.
And then if you want to go ahead, you want to talk about something, I'm actually going to swap headphones real quick while you keep talking.
Yeah. I guess from there we were talking about Ben being so controversial. A little fun fact that I dug up was that after a day of shooting, he and an extra were driving home, and this group of teenagers were chasing after him, calling him, racial slurs and chasing him with a tire iron. And it's funny because in that movie, Ben is fighting off these ghouls with a tire iron, and he came out and said that the irony is just in plain sight. It's an everyday world that he was so excited to be working on this movie and and dealing with these issues head on. And it really makes you think about how ahead of time this movie was. With 1968 going on, you had the civil rights movement, MLK dying, Black Power and Black Panthers rising up, and Dwayne Jones, the actor for Ben, really fought a lot for his role, for a black man being the lead character. That's another reason why I love that character so much. It's great.
So yeah, that was crazy. I can't believe that they chased him with the tire iron. Like,
yeah, what of all things, right?
What are the freaking odds, right? So now, at this point in the film, we actually have the introduction of some new characters.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is where we get into the Coopers and Tom and Judy.
Yes, and they pop out of like a little bunker. It's pretty much like a basement that is there inside the house. They had been there the entire time. Oh, I didn't want to interrupt you. You're about to say something.
Oh, no. I was just going to say the same things that you were, this little bunker cellar type thing that they pop out of.
Gotcha. Yeah. And then they have their daughters down there as well.
Karen, their daughter.
Mm-hmm, the daughter of the Coopers. And so they pop out. They get into like a little argument with Ben because they're telling for Ben and Barbara to get into the bunker because it's safest there. Because on the door, they have basically two wooden planks that cover it and slide so that way nobody could get in. But Ben is very hesitant about doing that because there's no way out. So if for some reason the zombies do get in there, there's literally no way for them to leave. They're trapped. They get into a disagreement. Ben, as we kind of mentioned, takes headstrong as a leader, and he basically tells Mr. Cooper, he tells him, "Hey, if you want to go back down there, that's fine, but I'm gonna stay up here." And Mr. Cooper, he wants to go down there. He wants to take the food. He wants to take the weapons and everything. And Ben tells him, "Is this your house? Is this your house?" Mr. Cooper basically says no. And he says, "Well, they're not going anywhere. They're staying here." And he tells Tom, he says, ask him what he wants to do. And Tom is the reasonable one. He understands both sides of it. And he's siding with Ben because he understands exactly what Ben's saying. And he's kind of the voice of reason, or attempts to be, throughout this movie.
Yeah, that one actually stood out to me. And a lot of the theories that I was reading up on is that, what's his name? Henry, right? Henry Cooper is fighting with Ben for that power struggle. And Harry thinks he plays his race and his age, and he thinks should be in charge. Meanwhile, Tom is that voice of reason. He's realizing that Ben is actually the correct guy. He's knows more, and he's siding with Ben. And the theory was that Tom is the white guy, but he's a teenager, and he's the one to be looking forward when it comes to the young people siding with the black people and the movement that's going on in the real world during that time. So that stood out to me, actually.
Yeah, and it totally makes sense because, yeah, it's Mr. Cooper the whole time. He's fighting for power. He doesn't like being told what to do, and that continues all the way up until his I'm glad he died. So up until his death.
Yes.
Which his death is can be seen as kind of controversial. So we'll definitely talk about that when we get there. What ends up happening is they ended up deciding at first, we get Judy, which is Tom's girlfriend or wife. They come up, and the Coopers stay down there with the girl. And when the husband goes back down there and says, like, oh, they're crazy, like, we're going to stay down here, we're safe, the wife is pissed. We pretty much learn that they're in an unhappy marriage already. She mentions that, oh, it's already difficult living with you, so staying down there together is going to be hard as well. And that's where we see their daughter for the first time. We see that she's sick. She's lying on this like kind of table, and she's out cold, or she's not out cold, but she's just not there. She's later on, she kind of like looks around a little bit, and she says like a few words, but that's really it.
Yes, exactly. And yeah, they just wanted to take care of her, and that's really where you kind of sympathize with Henry, is that he would just want safety for his daughter because she's feeling so unwell.
Mm-hmm. Right. And then we kind of get a part where, as the viewer, Romero did a good job of, because like as you're watching it, you're like, yo, screw Henry Cooper, like I'm with Ben and Tom. But one of the things that Henry Cooper says a lot is, he goes, these boarded windows aren't going to hold. Like, they're not going to hold. They're not strong. And there's a part where, as Ben's walking by one of the doors or the window, the zombie, like it was super clean. It just like, the ghoul, I should say, stuck its hands through like one of the little holes and grabbed Ben. And so then like he had his gun with him, so he shot and eventually got away. But it kind of makes you think, well, maybe Henry's right. Maybe being up there isn't safe. Maybe the bunker is the right place to be.
And we soon actually find that out, because the ghoul is just, the numbers, it's a numbers game. And that's always been a big thing in zombie movies, is that the numbers outweigh you, not just worrying about the bite. It's worrying about that number.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And so something that was, what ends up happening is Mr. Cooper at some point comes back up, and he's gonna bring the wife up as well. And in return, Judy is gonna go back down with the daughter. And the thing that's important here is this: if you pay attention, is where you realize, if you hadn't already guessed it, that the daughter was bit by a zombie. How do you know that? Because the way the camera is, it really kind of focuses, it doesn't focus because it's a wide angle, but her arm is like, her shirt's lifted up like this, and her arm is exposed, and on her arm is a single bandage, and it's like super bloody.
Yeah, and that's that first, like, oh, Karen's bit, like, ooh, is something gonna happen later in the movie? It's that foreshadowing. Mm-hmm.
Definitely, that's where it starts to go. And it's like, well, at that point, as the viewer, I'm like, well, the bunker's not safe, because at some point she's gonna turn into a ghoul, and whoever's down there is gonna get got. It's just a matter of really when
and who.
Yes, and who? So I really like that they did. I thought that was really neat because you kind of expect it when they say like, well, she's sick, and they kind of mention when they're upstairs. I think they ask what happened to her, or either Ben asks, and at first they don't say anything. It's not till towards the end of the movie when they're all kind of sitting on the couch, and it's before the big bomb rush of zombies come. They say, "Oh, well, those things got to her and bit her." And you see Ben gets up, and he's not like insinuating that he's gonna kill her. He still says that he's gonna help her, but he like loads his gun, or he like picks up his gun in a way that kind of signifies that like if it comes down to it, he's gonna do what he has to do.
Yeah, and during that part, he asked, or he says that they don't know what those things have. We don't know what disease, if it's infectious. So they don't know that these ghouls really, eat people and then turn them into more ghouls. So they don't, that's what stood out to me too, is that they're still learning about all these things while the movie's going on. And they don't know about these zombies or ghouls beforehand, like you see in today's movies.
Right. Exactly. One of the other things that was pretty cool, and it kind of goes with like the cigarette thing where everybody's smoking, is when they get the TV up and running, they're watching TV, and on the TV they mention about how like there's that place that they can get them to. It's like kind of like I guess like a little quarantine area or whatever, and they say to leave the house, and Mr. Cooper ends up saying like, "Oh, are you sure that's right? Like, no, like we should stay here. We shouldn't leave this house. We shouldn't leave this house." And Tom says, the television said it's the right thing to do. And that's a very like 1950s, 60s, 70s thing where like if someone on TV said it, people believed it.
Yeah, exactly. That's something to think about as well. Is during that time period, everybody just believed everything. And that's kind of followed with that generation to now. Like they believe so much on media and TV. It's crazy.
Yep. So I always, those little like tidbits that were thrown in, which is funny because like it wasn't necessarily thrown in to hint back at that because that movie was made back then. It was just normal that now all these years later we can look back and be like, I know what they mean by that,
Yeah, exactly.
So let's see here. After that, we got the television part. So here's where we find out. They mention that there's like a gas pump, and they need to get gasoline, and it's a bit ways away, but they got to take the truck. Ben says that he's not good with the truck. Tom is. So he says, you got to be the one to drive the truck, and it's going to be Tom and Ben that go. And this is where I understand you did it for love, Judy, but you dumb as hell. So they
never do things for love.
Oh my gosh. I was so frustrated watching this, man. So they come up with this plan. We of course know the ghouls don't like fire. So you have Mr. Cooper that's going to be up top throwing Molotov cocktails down to try and get them away from the truck. They go out. Ben's got this stake with like fire on it, and Tom like runs in the truck. The ghouls are like hitting on it, trying to get inside, and Ben's basically about to get on the back of the truck with the stake, and that's how they're going to drive. But then Judy's like, I have to go. So she like runs out the door and then just stops like dead in her tracks. Oh my goodness, man. I was like yelling at her when I was like watching the movie. Like I was pissed.
Dude, white women ruin everything in horror movies. It's just a thing.
Oh man, it was bad. It made like absolutely no sense.
So at this point, Ben, Tom, and Judy drive to the nearby pump, and they jump off. Ben and Tom jump off the truck and try to go as quickly as possible to fill up the truck with gas. However, it's locked, so Ben shoots the lock, but then gas starts spraying everywhere and it lands on the fire. And while Tom is trying to put the hose into the truck, the fire starts to spread all over the truck, and the truck starts catching fire while Judy is inside of it. Yeah, this young couple at this point, they're just dumb, especially Judy. It blows my mind how dumb these people can be.
Right, like you're getting in a truck that is like already caught on fire.
Yeah. And then the truck just blows up and they die. Yeah,
they die in the car fire. And then you have where Ben comes back and he's trying to get back into the house, but Cooper didn't want to let him in initially. Cooper kind of is like hesitant because he had the door closed because he was scared. And then Cooper decides to basically kind of like let Ben in, and Ben's like pissed. So they like board up the door, and then Ben immediately goes to just like beating the shit out of Cooper.
Yes, and at this point you are so excited because fucking Henry Cooper, he deserves it. Like, he's being an obsessive control freak, especially when it comes to Ben. And Ben just goes at him because why wouldn't he let him in the house? He's too afraid to do anything. He's not fit for a leadership role, even though he wants it so bad.
Yep. And at this point, so Ben gets a bloody nose, and the camera shows the zombies, and they're actually going inside the car and like taking parts of Tom and Judy's flesh, and they're eating them. They're eating it like a 2-piece special at Popeyes, bro.
Yeah, and at this point, everybody inside the house is becoming aware that these are flesh eaters, and because, like I said earlier, they're learning about these ghouls as the movie goes on, and this is when they realize that these ghouls are flesh-eating monsters, and this is where they become really afraid for their lives.
Yes, and so everyone's kind of like just worried about what's going on. As of right now, the daughter is downstairs, but everybody else is, and that's Karen, of course, she's downstairs, and then the Cooper family, Ben, and Barbara, she's still there. She's not doing anything. She's still just distraught, has like no idea what's going on. She's there. And what ends up happening is they are like a police chief. It kind of cuts to a different scene where there's like a whole police squad and military that have been brought out, and the news is like interviewing one of them, like a police chief, and they're like, what do you know about them? And he says, well, they move slow and they're dead. And he says that like they had just killed 2 or 3 of them that were trying to get into some vehicle, and basically that they're gonna, stop everything.
Yeah, and he also mentions the fact that these things can be killed by a good blow to the head. So that's where Ben and everybody starts to realize, oh, there's more than one way of killing them, and it's not just fire.
Yes. And at this point, that's when the ghouls, they all immediately attacked the house. Basically, after they got done, they finished up their Popeye special of Judy and Tom, and they all bomb rushed the house, and they're hitting it. And this is where we get the return of the OG ghoul from the very beginning, our Olympic sprinter. He's back, but he's no longer sprinting. He's like all the other ghouls. He's slow. However, he does pick up something off the ground, and he's kind of hitting it on the door very slowly, and they're starting to get in. And
yeah, as we're talking about this, it kind of just, maybe that he goes slower because he's so hungry. He hadn't really eaten much, maybe that's a thing that happens. If they don't eat, they just start losing their ability to properly function like he was before. So that's another
That is true, yeah, because when we think back, if he was at that cemetery, and obviously lots of people go to cemetery to pay their respects to their loved ones, he could have just been done feasting on somebody before he killed Johnny. So maybe that is why he was so fast.
Exactly.
So we get that part, and Ben runs up to the left window and he's pushing at it and he's asking for Cooper's help. And Cooper's wife, she goes up to like the door and she's pushing it backwards, and they're kind of grabbing at her hair. They're grabbing kind of all around her neck and her chest. And Cooper keeps asking for help. Ben keeps asking for help, and Cooper's hesitant because he didn't want to. He wants to basically go down to the bunker. And at this point, Ben, or actually, no, this happened first. Our girl Barbara, she came to her senses.
Yeah, she realizes what's going on and I guess suddenly decides to help for no reason. And she just starts bringing boards and closing up the broken down door, but it ends up in her fate. So
Yes, where we see the return of Johnny, who is now a ghoul himself.
yeah, Johnny out of nowhere just comes and starts attacking his sister. And at this point, the realization that it is Johnny is because at the beginning of the movie, he puts on these like driving gloves. It's very noticeable. He does it to where, oh, this is going to pop up later in the movie. And he grabs the inside of the door frame and you're like, oh, that's Johnny. Those are the same gloves. And of course, Barbara screaming with her ugly scream, "No, Johnny, no."
Oh my goodness. Yeah, man. It's funny too, because it's like Barbara had snapped into her senses. She sees Johnny and she immediately goes back in a trance and she can't do nothing. And they just suck her in and she gets devoured by him.
Yeah.
And so this is where we get to towards the end of the film, and a very kind of important part where, like we mentioned earlier, Ben is willing to do anything to make sure that he survives. So Mr. Cooper wants Ben's gun, but obviously he can't get it. He wants a gun. He even mentions it to his wife earlier before this happens, that he says, like, I need to get that dang gun. And so while Ben's pushing against the window, the gun falls. Ben immediately goes to like try and grab the gun, and Ben stops with the windows, kind of pushes off of Mr. Cooper, and then shoots him, which I wasn't expecting at first, but it is definitely one of those kind of, hey, you're, all these years, like, white people have power over black people. They kind of did what they want with them. Cooper wanted the gun to take charge, and he didn't have charge the whole movie. And Ben wasn't going to let, Mr. Cooper take that charge away from him, and he did what he had to do. He shot him right in front of his wife.
Yeah, I thought it was a fitting end to Mr. Cooper because, like you said, he picked up the gun when it fell, and immediately he was like, you can do whatever you want. I'm taking my gun and my wife, and we're going back to the cellar. But Ben overpowers him almost immediately, like with no effort. And that just shows you like how much of a bad leader that Mr. Cooper could have been if he had taken charge the whole time.
Exactly. And so after Mr. Cooper gets shot, he ends up going down the stairs to like the little cellar, and he pretty much tries to, he sees his daughter one last time. He kind of reaches up his hand and then just falls to his death. At this point, all that's left is, of course, Ben and Mr. Cooper's wife. And this is where we have Mr. Cooper's wife. She ends up going...
Yeah, Helen.
Helen. Okay, I was trying to remember her name. I'm like, what's her name again? So, yeah, Helen then goes downstairs, and she sees, the husband there on the ground, and Karen, the daughter, is actually eating the husband's arm.
Yeah, when I first saw this movie, I think this is what haunted me the most, is seeing a child eating their father. It was just very gruesome, and leading up to that, Helen, the mother, she's just in shock, and she doesn't realize that, oh, my daughter is eating my husband, and she just becomes very still, almost like Barbara type state,
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So yeah, she gets that weird like trance, and she's out of it, and then that's when Karen comes with, what was that, like a pot? It was like a dirt like scooper thing, right? They use for like potting plants.
Yeah, it was a triangle tool. I don't know the exact name of it, but she just goes at her mother.
Yep, and she's just stabbing her over and over and over, and this is where we get the worst scream of all time. Terrible. It's so bad, man.
Yeah, it was like layers on top of layers of different screams that weren't even Helen's. Like, it was just bad, and I laughed. It made me laugh now, just rewatching that and thinking how ridiculous that scene is. And it could have been a lot better if they would have just kept the normal scream and focused more on Karen doing the stabbing. But I guess they didn't really want to show a child killing their mother like that.
Mm-hmm. Right. And then kind of something that you notice in the film, like when we mentioned earlier, when Ben first killed those two ghouls, they just show Ben kind of like on his angle, but you don't see the actual kind of him connecting with the zombie. And while in this case it's mainly focused on Helen, Karen's mom, you still don't see her really getting hit with, like, stabbed by that tool. It's focusing on her face on that screen.
Yeah, exactly. You don't get too much of that gruesome death that you were kind of hoping for. But that also has to do with the times of the movie.
Yes. And so then from there, we end up having where, what is it? Our man Ben, it's obvious he's getting overran up top. All the ghouls are getting in, and so he realizes he's got to make he has to actually go down to the cellar.
Yeah, this point he's just overwhelmed, and it's really just him, and he thinks going down in the cellar that everybody's gonna be, well, not everybody, but I guess Helen, he's expecting her to be alive, but when he closes up and boards up that cellar, he starts making his way downstairs and realizing that everybody's dead. Oh, and while he's trying to make his way to the cellar, Karen is actually coming up the stairs right behind him, and she tries to attack him, but it's a child, so he just throws her onto the couch like nothing. And that's when he boards up the cellar, and Mr. Cooper, what was his name? Harry, I believe? Yeah, Harry Cooper. He turns into a ghoul at that point, and Ben has no remorse when he shoots him in the head.
Yep. And then same thing, very like seconds after, that's when Helen Cooper becomes a ghoul as well. And for this one, he did have a little more remorse because obviously she didn't do anything wrong to him. But hey, it ill what it ill. She got cleaned up.
And I also noticed at this point, this is where you see some emotion out of him. This is where he's like, oh my God, this is overwhelming. What is going on here? And up to that point, he had kept his composure. He kept everything together. And so it was nice to see that he was overwhelmed. He wasn't just this strong character who needed to get things done, that he is human. And that was important in the movie.
Exactly. And so from here, that is when he boards up the cellar, and he pretty much stays there overnight. And we get the scene of the cops, or the marshals, military guys that we mentioned earlier, that were being interviewed by the news. They're back in the forefront. If you want to go ahead and talk about that.
Yeah, so these group of, I guess, ghoul fighters, you can call them. It's just a bunch of white guys, really. And and they're going through the towns, making and clearing out the ghouls with their guns. And they eventually reach the farmhouse, and Ben kind of realizes there's no sound throughout the house, and maybe that distant sound he hears is help. So he emerges from the cellar and tries to make his way outside, but these white men are instructed by the sheriff, basically shoot anything that moves. And you see Ben creeping up to the window with his gun, making sure that everything's okay. And at this point, the sheriff instructs one of the other guys to shoot him. And man, this part is absolutely heartbreaking, because Ben had fought so hard and made it through the night, and he just gets shot like nothing. No question as to what he may be, and it's just absolutely heartbreaking.
Definitely, yeah. And then that's where we end up kind of getting to a little on topic of what's going on today. And
yeah, exactly. That these white sheriff type people, basically cops, are going around just shooting anything that they're afraid of, without even questioning, it's
especially because you have to know that obviously Ben didn't look like a ghoul. He was holding a gun, and we, up until that point, we hadn't seen any ghouls hold guns, know how to aim them and everything. And so you can suspect that he aimed, he saw a black man, and he just shot him because, again, during that time, everything was going on, and it's kind of like in their minds that he's no better than these ghouls.
When I was doing a little bit of research about this and the theories and so forth, one other thing that stood out to me is someone mentioned that earlier in the broadcast, when you see the TV playing, one of the reporters mentions that these things are animal-like and you should just shoot them. And that kind of transfers over to this ending where white people see black people as, and have always portrayed them as animal-like and are afraid of them and just to kill them on sight. And it's that really stood out to me as well. It's that maybe this guy saw him as that, and it wasn't right. Like, he didn't even question it. He just shot him,
Right. Exactly. And then all they do too is they instructed, if I'm not mistaken, if I remember correctly at the end, just to burn his body with the rest of them.
Mm-hmm. Yep. He just treated him like everything else and burned him right there.
Jeez. Definitely tough to watch. But that, my friends, is the end of the movie. Night of the Living Dead.
Night of the Living Dead.
So at this time, we went over kind of scene by scene of the movie. We talked about the actors. We talked about where you can find the movie, where you can stream the movie, some fun facts, everything in between. But now it's time for us to give our rating. Jose, how many pints of blood out of 10 are you giving Night of the Living Dead?
Me personally, I'm going to give this a 6.5 out of 10 pints of blood. What do you give this movie?
I'm giving it a solid 8.5 pints.
All right, 8.5. Why do you feel that way?
I think I feel that way because the movie holds up. I think a lot of times when you watch some of these older movies is because we have all this newer technology, newer effects and everything. It can really make some of these movies look dated. It can really make some of them look bad. And I mean, you guys heard today, we talked about some of these parts of this movie that were bad, that weren't filmed that great, or maybe something didn't make too much sense. But when you consider the movie as a whole, I feel like it did really well. I try to put myself in the shoes as if I was in the theaters back in 1968 going to watch this. And at that time, nothing like this was really ever seen. And I mean, we talked about earlier as well, you know, no, there wasn't any type of ratings on movies, and parents were, you know, pissed off because they couldn't believe their kids had watched this. It was going to traumatize them and haunt them and stuff. And I can see that, you know, when I look at a lot of the parts of this film, whether it's the ghouls eating the people's flesh, whether it's the Karen, the little girl, stabbing their mom, and with that pot digger thing, like it's a gruesome movie when you think about it in that context. The message of the movie as well, I feel like, is very important, and it set the tone for what ultimately was to come. And I think the movie's very rewatchable as well. Something that if someone wanted me to watch it next week, I could watch it with them and be totally cool with it. So that's why I give it 8.5 pints.
All right. I can definitely see your point of view on this. I know you questioned this before we recorded, but to me, the movie is just kind of boring in between the deaths. For me, a horror movie has to really scare me and stand out, and this one just didn't do it for me. You know, I can't say that I'm gonna be willing to rewatch this in a week like you can. It's definitely something that I felt I had to get through more than an exciting time for me to really take it all in. The characters were pretty good. I think a few things could have been improved as far as writing wise, but considering the budget and everything, I definitely understand it. I do believe that it is a must watch. You have to watch this movie at least one point in your life. And there are those movies, but there are some that aren't as rewatchable as others. And I believe that this is just one of those movies. But I can definitely appreciate how someone can really want to rewatch this movie and love everything about it. That's not what I'm trying to say. Is that for me personally, I just have a different taste in horror movies than what this is.
I got you. And that's totally understandable. And I think that's a good thing or I guess the cool thing with horror movies is, while it's all under one umbrella, there's so many different rain droplets, if you will, that's on the umbrella of all different types of horror movies. So, you know, it's not going to be for everyone. So my question is, we know how many pints of blood you're giving it. Are you adding this film to your shelf?
Oh, for sure. This is like I said, it's a must watch. Like I know for sure that I'm gonna want to look at the commentary and stuff that Criterion collection comes with. I want to know more about this film, and just reading and researching as much as I could. Man, the backstory behind this film is just so interesting, because they didn't want to make this as, oh, it's a black lead or it's gonna be civil rights based or anything that we take it as nowadays, you know. So hearing Romero's side of the story versus Dwayne's, or just different people's opinions, it's definitely an interesting topic. And I really do like the fact that this movie is so controversial.
Right. All right. Good to know. I was just curious because, a lot of time with your 6.5, I was like, I wonder if he would buy it then.
I mean, it's not a bad rating. It's above average,
I guess because I looked at it like this: if you had a class and you dropped a 65, you failed.
Oh, I mean, in some colleges, that's considered a D in a passing grade, sir.
Hey, you know what I'm saying? C's get degrees. What's up?
Hey, there you go. There you go.
But I think we got everything covered. Was there any kind of final thoughts you had or last words?
Let's see here. Like I said, I really recommend you watch this movie, especially with what's going on in the world today. But overall, I'm glad everybody joined us for this first episode of the Gruesome Task podcast. I had such a blast talking about this movie. I had such a blast watching this movie over and over and researching as much as I could. I'm excited for the future.
Yes, sir, I am as well. I want to thank you for presenting the opportunity to me to join you here on this podcast and be able to discuss horror films. I do want to let everybody know that you do want to be following us on Instagram. Again, our link will be in the description for that, because every Wednesday is when we are going to announce the next movie that we're going to be talking about. So if you want to stay up to date, got to give us a follow. Got it.
Yeah, get out there on social media. We're going to be as involved as possible with everybody. Any interactions that, feel free to message us. We're not afraid to give a quick shout out or anything.
Yes, and you can follow us as well on our personal socials. For Deonte, of course, got Instagram, that is at xdeontems. That is XDEONTEMS, and on it Twitter at _under the knife. Where can they find you, sir?
I'm on Instagram at j.a.gallegos, GALLEGOS. And I'm also on the Twitter. You can find me with that boy Jose, DATBOIJOSE.
All right. So thank you once again for joining us, folks. That's going to wrap it up from here. Go out, watch some horror movies, buy some horror movies. How many pints of blood are you drinking tonight?
Life sucks, and then you die.